The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty Afghan compound as Sarah Martinez adjusted her medical bag one final time. She had volunteered for this mission against her commanding officer's better judgment. The remote village had been without proper medical care for months, and the reports coming back spoke of children dying from preventable diseases and wounded civilians with no hope of treatment. Sarah wasn't just any medic. She was one of the Navy's most skilled combat medical technicians, trained in trauma surgery and field medicine that would make most civilian doctors envious. But today she wore civilian clothes and carried only basic medical supplies. Her mission was simple: provide humanitarian aid to the village while gathering intelligence on Taliban movements in the area. The helicopter touched down 2 miles from the village, kicking up a cloud of sand that made everyone squint and cover their faces. Sarah grabbed her bag and jumped out, followed by her small team of 3 other aid workers. They were supposed to blend in, look like a normal humanitarian mission. No weapons, no military gear, just people trying to help. "Remember, we're civilians today," whispered Jake, the team leader, as they walked toward the village. "No military talk, no ranks, nothing that gives us away." Sarah nodded, but something felt wrong. The village was too quiet. In her previous deployments, she had learned to trust her instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that they were walking into trouble. The village appeared deserted at first. Mud brick houses stood empty, doors hanging open in the wind. Sarah's heart sank. Had they come all this way for nothing? Then she heard it, a faint crying sound coming from one of the buildings. "Did you hear that?" she whispered to Jake. They approached the sound carefully. Inside a small house, they found an elderly woman holding a young boy, maybe 8 years old. The child was burning with fever, his breathing shallow and rapid. Without thinking, Sarah knelt beside them and began her assessment. "Pneumonia," she said quietly to Jake. "He needs antibiotics immediately, or he won't make it through the night." As Sarah worked, more villagers began to appear. They had been hiding, waiting to see if the strangers were friend or foe. Word spread quickly that there was a doctor among them, and soon Sarah found herself treating a line of patients that seemed to never end. There was Fatima, a young mother whose baby hadn't been eating properly for weeks. An old man named Abdul with diabetes who hadn't had proper medication in months. A teenage girl with an infected wound that had been festering for days. Sarah worked tirelessly, using every bit of her training to help them with the limited supplies she had brought. Hours passed like minutes. Sarah was so focused on her patients that she didn't notice the sun beginning to set. She didn't notice Jake's increasingly worried glances toward the hills surrounding the village. She didn't notice the way some of the villagers kept looking over their shoulders, as if expecting something terrible to happen. It was while she was stitching up a deep cut on a young man's arm that the attack began. The first explosion shook the entire building. Dust rained from the ceiling as Sarah instinctively covered her patient with her own body. The sound of gunfire erupted from multiple directions, and through the window, she could see muzzle flashes in the growing darkness. "Taliban!" someone screamed in Pashto. Jake burst through the door, his face grim. "We need to move now. There's at least 20 of them, and they've got us surrounded." But Sarah looked at her patients. The little boy with pneumonia was finally breathing easier after the medication she'd given him. The old man with diabetes was conscious for the first time in days. The young mother was holding her baby, who was finally feeding properly. How could she leave them? "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "Sarah, that's suicide. We can't protect you here." "Then don't protect me. Get the others out. I'm staying with these people." Jake stared at her for a moment, recognizing the determination in her eyes that he'd seen in the field before. He knew better than to argue with her when she had that look. "At least take this," he said, pressing a small radio into her hand. "If you get a chance, call for extraction." The gunfire was getting closer. Through the window, Sarah could see armed figures moving between the buildings. The villagers were terrified, pressing themselves against the walls, trying to make themselves invisible. "Everyone stay calm," Sarah said in the little Pashto she knew. "Stay down, stay quiet. She moved from patient to patient, checking on them despite the chaos outside. The elderly woman who had been holding the sick boy was shaking with fear, but she refused to let go of the child. The young mother clutched her baby tighter with each explosion. Then the door burst open. 3 Taliban fighters entered, their weapons raised. They shouted something in Pashto that Sarah didn't understand, but their meaning was clear. Everyone on the ground now. Sarah slowly raised her hands, still kneeling beside the old man with diabetes. One of the fighters grabbed her roughly by the arm and pulled her to her feet. He said something to his companions, gesturing at her blonde hair and pale skin. She was clearly foreign, clearly American. They zip-tied her hands behind her back and pushed her outside. The village was now under complete Taliban control. She could see the bodies of Jake and the other aid workers lying in the street, and her heart broke. They had died trying to help people, just like she was trying to do. The Taliban commander approached her. He was young, maybe in his 20s, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through her. "You are American," he said in accented English. Sarah said nothing. "You're a spy, yes? Military?" Again, Sarah remained silent. She had been trained for this scenario, though she'd hoped never to face it. Never give information to the enemy. Name, rank, serial number only, but she wasn't even supposed to have those tonight. She was a civilian humanitarian worker, at least on paper. The commander studied her for a long moment. "You help people in there." "Why?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Because they needed help. Americans help no one but Americans." "You're wrong." He backhanded her across the face, hard enough that she tasted blood. But Sarah didn't cry out. She'd taken worse hits during training, and she wouldn't give him the satisfaction. "You will tell us who sent you. You will tell us what Americans plan for this region." "I'm a humanitarian worker. I came here to help sick people." Another blow, this one to her stomach. Sarah doubled over, but forced herself to stay on her feet. The questioning continued for what felt like hours. They want to know about military positions, troop movements, mission plans. Sarah gave them nothing but her cover story. She was a civilian medical worker with Doctors International, here to provide aid to the village. Finally, the commander grew frustrated. "You think you are strong? You think you are a hero?" He gestured to 2 of his men. "Put her with the others." They dragged Sarah to a small building where the surviving villagers were being held. The elderly woman was there, still holding the sick boy. The young mother cowered in a corner with her baby. Abdul, the old man with diabetes, was sitting against the wall, looking pale and weak. Sarah was pushed inside, and the door was barred behind her. In the dim light, filtering through a crack in the wall, she could see the fear in everyone's eyes. "Is anyone hurt?" she whispered. Several people had minor injuries from being roughly handled. Despite her own bound hands, Sarah did her best to check on everyone. The sick boy's fever had returned, and she could hear the congestion in his lungs getting worse. Without proper medication, he would be in real danger soon. "We need to get him help," she whispered to the elderly woman, who Sarah now realized was the boy's grandmother. The woman said something in Pashto that Sarah didn't understand, but her meaning was clear from her expression. There was no help coming. Outside, they could hear the Taliban fighters talking and laughing. Occasionally, one would bang on the door or shout something threatening in Pashto. As the night wore on, Sarah worked on loosening her restraints. The zip ties were tight, but she'd been trained in escape techniques. It took hours of careful, patient work, but finally she felt one of her hands slip free. She immediately went to the sick boy. His fever was dangerously high now, and his breathing was labored. Sarah had some emergency medication hidden in the lining of her jacket, standard procedure for medics in hostile territory. But she had to be careful. If the Taliban found it, they'd know she was more than just a civilian aid worker. Working in the darkness, she gave the boy a small dose of antibiotics and fever reducer. It wasn't much, but it might keep him alive until they could get real help. "What are you doing?" whispered a voice in heavily accented English. Sarah turned to see a young man she hadn't noticed before. He was maybe 25, with kind eyes and a gentle face that seemed out of place in this terrifying situation. "I'm trying to help the boy." she whispered back. You're a doctor? Something like that. The young man introduced himself as Rashid. He had been studying to be a teacher before the war came to his village. He spoke several languages and had been translating for Sarah without her realizing it, helping her communicate with the other prisoners. The boy is Ahmad, Rashid whispered. His parents were killed last month by bomb. His grandmother, Bibi Jan, she is all he has left. Sarah looked at the elderly woman holding the child so protectively. Despite everything they were facing, despite her own terror, this woman's only concern was for her grandson. Rashid, I need you to listen carefully, Sarah whispered. I have medical training, more than they know. I might be able to help people, but I need you to translate for me. Can you do that? Rashid nodded eagerly. Yes, anything to help. As dawn approached, Sarah could hear activity outside increasing. The Taliban fighters were preparing for something, though she couldn't tell what. Then the door opened, and the commander stepped inside. You, he pointed at Sarah. Kulme. Sarah was dragged outside again. This time, she noticed something different in the commander's demeanor. He seemed less confident, more nervous. My men are injured, he said without preamble. You will help them. I told you, I'm not a doctor. You lie. He grabbed her chin roughly and forced her to look at him. Hamid saw you give medicine to the boy. Real medicine, not village remedies. You are trained. Sarah's mind raced. If she admitted to medical training, it would blow her cover as a simple aid worker. But if she refused to help, people would die. And, judging by the desperation in the commander's voice, some of his men were seriously wounded. If I help your men, will you let the villagers go? The commander studied her for a long moment. If you save my brother, maybe we talk. His brother. That explained the desperation. Sarah nodded slowly. I'll need my medical bag. And I'll need the restraints removed. I can't work with my hands tied. The commander hesitated, then gestured to one of his men, who cut the zip ties from Sarah's wrists. They led her to another building where 3 Taliban fighters lay wounded. One had taken shrapnel to the chest and was breathing with difficulty. Another had a bullet wound in his leg that was bleeding heavily. The third, who Sarah assumed was the commander's brother based on their similar features, had been shot in the abdomen and was unconscious. Sarah assessed the situation quickly. All 3 men needed immediate surgery, the kind of advanced trauma care that was far beyond what a simple aid worker should be able to provide. I'll need clean water, lots of it, boiled if possible, and clean cloths, anything you can find. As she worked, Sarah fell back on her military medical training. The chest wound needed immediate attention to prevent a collapsed lung. The leg wound required a tourniquet and pressure bandaging. But it was the abdominal wound that worried her most. Internal bleeding, possibly organ damage. This man needed a real hospital. For hours, Sarah worked to save the lives of men who would have killed her without hesitation. It was one of the hardest things she'd ever done, but her oath as a medical professional was clear. Do no harm, help all who need it. The commander watched her every move, his eyes never leaving her hands as she worked on his brother. Sarah could feel his desperation, his fear of losing someone he loved. Despite everything, despite the fact that these men were her enemies, she found herself understanding his pain. Where did you learn this? The commander asked quietly as Sarah sutured his brother's wound. Medical school, Sarah lied smoothly. I specialized in trauma surgery. You are very young for such training. I'm older than I look. By midday, Sarah had stabilized all 3 wounded fighters. The one with the chest wound was breathing normally again. The leg wound had stopped bleeding. And the commander's brother, while still unconscious, had regained some color and his vital signs were improving. The commander stared at his brother for a long time, then looked at Sarah. You saved him. He's not out of danger yet. He needs real medical care, a proper hospital. There is no hospital. Then he needs to be evacuated somewhere that can help him. The commander's jaw tightened. You think I am fool? You want me to reveal our position to your military? Sarah met his gaze steadily. I think you're a man who loves his brother and wants him to live. For a moment, something human flickered in the commander's eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a military leader. You will stay. Continue to treat him. If he dies, you die. Sarah nodded. She had expected as much. As the day wore on, Sarah was allowed to move between the wounded fighters and the imprisoned villagers. Under heavy guard, she did what she could for everyone. Young Ahmed's fever had broken, much to his grandmother's relief. The other villagers were physically unharmed, but terrified. Rashid continued to help translate, and Sarah began to piece together the larger situation. This Taliban group was on the run from a major military operation. They had taken casualties and were using the village as a temporary refuge while they figured out their next move. How long do you think they'll keep us here? Sarah whispered to Rashid during one of her visits to check on the villagers. I do not know, but the commander, his name is Farid. He's not like the others. He has honor, even if he is our enemy. What do you mean? Yesterday, before you came, some of his men wanted to hurt the women. He stopped them, said, "We are not animals. We follow the rules of war." Sarah processed this information. A Taliban commander with a sense of honor was unusual, but it might be something she could work with. That evening, as Sarah was checking on the commander's brother, she noticed something concerning. Despite her efforts, his condition was deteriorating. Internal bleeding that she couldn't stop with field medicine, possible infection setting in. He's getting worse, she told Farid honestly. The commander's face darkened. You said you save him. A bottom time. But he needs surgery, real surgery in a real hospital. I've done everything I can here. Farid stared at his brother's pale face. Sarah could see the war between duty and love playing out in his expression. If I call for medical evacuation, she said quietly, your brother could live. And reveal our position to your forces. Yes, you would do this? Save the life of your enemy. Sarah looked at the unconscious man, barely older than herself. He's not my enemy right now. Right now, he's just a patient who needs help. Farid studied her for a long time. You are not what I expected from an American. Most of us aren't what you expect. The commander stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening sky. Sarah waited, knowing that this moment could determine not just his brother's fate, but the fate of all the hostages. Finally, Farid turned back to her. If I allow this, what guarantee do I have that they will not simply attack? Medical evacuations are protected under the Geneva Convention. They'll send unarmed medical personnel. And if they bring soldiers instead? Sarah met his gaze honestly. Then you'll kill me and the hostages and probably die fighting. But your brother will still be dead. The stark truth of her words hung in the air between them. Farid's hand moved unconsciously to the radio at his belt. As the night deepened, Sarah found herself at the center of an impossible situation. Lives hung in the balance. Not just the commander's brother, but all the hostages. And somewhere out there, she knew American forces were planning a rescue operation that could end in disaster for everyone involved. The radio in her pocket, the one Jake had given her, remained silent. She hadn't tried to use it yet, hadn't dared to risk it. But as she looked around at the faces of the people depending on her, the sick boy Ahmad, his terrified grandmother, the young mother with her baby, Rashid, who had become her translator and friend, and even the wounded Taliban fighters she had treated, Sarah realized that she might be the only person who could prevent this situation from ending in tragedy. The question was, what was she willing to sacrifice to save them all? The first light of dawn brought no relief to the tense situation in the village. Sarah had spent the night moving between her patients, trying to keep everyone stable while monitoring Farid's brother, whose condition continued to worsen despite her best efforts. She was checking on Ahmad when Rashid approached her quietly. The commander's brother, Khalil, he is very bad, he whispered in English. Sarah nodded grimly. He needs surgery within hours or... She didn't need to finish the sentence. Rashid's face fell. Farid will blame you if his brother dies. I know. There is something else you should know, Rashid said, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. Last night, I heard the fighters talking. American forces, they're close. Very close. Farid knows this. Sarah's pulse quickened. How close? Maybe 2, 3 kilometers. They're setting up. what do you call it, a circle around us? A perimeter. The rescue operation she had been expecting was finally underway. But that could be either salvation or disaster, depending on how it played out. Rashid, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. The young man nodded. Do you trust me? Yes, of course. You saved Ahmed's life. Then, I need you to do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, no matter how strange it might seem. Can you do that? Rashid looked puzzled but nodded. Yes, I will do whatever you ask. Before Sarah could explain further, one of the Taliban fighters burst into the room. Commander wants you, he said roughly, grabbing Sarah's arm. She was dragged back to where Khalil lay dying. Farid was kneeling beside his brother, and Sarah could see the desperation and grief in his eyes. He is worse, Farid said without looking up. Yes, I told you he needs surgery. You will do surgery. I can't. Not here, not with these tools. He needs an operating room, proper equipment. Farid finally looked at her, and Sarah saw something dangerous in his expression. Then, you'll call your people. Get medical helicopter. Commander, one of his lieutenants interrupted. This is trap. Americans will come with soldiers. Then, we'll be ready for them. Farid stood and faced his men. But my brother will not die because we were too afraid to take risk. Sarah realized this was the moment she had been dreading and hoping for. If I make the call, what happens to the hostages? That depends on your people. If they come only with doctors, no weapons, hostages live. If they try to trick us, he didn't finish the threat. I'll need to use my radio. Farid gestured to one of his men, who retrieved the small radio Jake had given her. Sarah turned it on and immediately heard chatter on the emergency frequency. This is Dr. Martinez, she said, using her cover identity, but hoping the voice recognition would alert her real unit. I need immediate medical evacuation for a critical patient. Over. The response was immediate. Dr. Martinez, this is Colonel Hayes. What's your status? Colonel Hayes. Sarah knew him. He was the overall mission commander, which meant her real identity had been discovered. But she had to maintain her cover for the sake of the hostages. I'm treating a patient with severe abdominal trauma. He needs immediate surgical intervention. I'm requesting unarmed medical evacuation. There was a pause. Understood, Dr. Martinez. Can you confirm your location? Sarah looked at Farid, who nodded. Grid reference. She read out the coordinates Farid provided. Dr. Martinez, we'll have a medical team to you in 2 hours. Are you safe? I'm treating multiple patients, civilian and combatant casualties. I need the medical team to come unarmed, no security escort. Another pause, longer this time. That's not standard protocol, Doctor. Colonel, these people trust me. If armed forces approach, people will die. I need you to trust my judgment. Farid was listening to every word, his hand on his sidearm. Sarah knew she was walking a tightrope. Very well, Dr. Martinez. Medical team only, no weapons. ETA, 2 hours. Sarah signed off and handed the radio back to Farid. 2 hours, she said. Farid nodded. You have done well. Now we wait. The next 2 hours were the longest of Sarah's life. She worked frantically to keep Khalil stable, while also checking on the other wounded and the hostages. Ahmad was doing much better, his fever gone and his breathing clear. His grandmother, Bibi Jan, had barely left his side, but she managed a small smile of gratitude when Sarah checked on the boy. She wants to thank you, Rashid translated. She says you are like an angel. Tell her I'm just doing my job. She says no. She says you chose to stay when you could have run. That is not job. That is choice of good heart. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. In all her military training, no one had ever explained how hard it would be to maintain her humanity in situations like this. As the time for the medical evacuation approached, tension in the compound increased. Farid posted his men at strategic positions, and Sarah could see the weapons they had prepared. If this went wrong, it would become a bloodbath. Farid, she said, approaching the commander, I need to ask you something. He looked at her warily. When a medical team arrives, they're going to want to evacuate Khalil immediately. Are you going to let them? What do you mean? I mean, are you going to insist on coming with him? Because if you do, if any of your men try to get on that helicopter, the situation changes. Fard was quiet for a moment. You think I should let my brother go with your people? Trust Americans with his life. I think you should trust me. I'll go with him. I'll make sure he gets the care he needs. And then you disappear. Report our position, bring back soldiers. Sarah took a deep breath. Farid, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to listen carefully. I'm not who you think I am. The commander's hand moved to his weapon. I mean, I'm a doctor, that part is true. But I'm not a civilian aid worker. You are military. Yes, but that doesn't change the fact that I came here to help people. It doesn't change the fact that I've treated your wounded, including your brother. Farid stared at her for a long time. Why do you tell me this? Because I want you to understand that when I give you my word, it means something. When I promise that I'll take care of your brother, you could trust that promise. And what about my men? What about the villagers? That's up to you. But I'm asking you to think about what Ahmed's grandmother said. Sometimes we have to choose between our duties as soldiers and our responsibilities as human beings. Before Farid could respond, one of his lookouts called out that a helicopter was approaching. Sarah moved to the window and saw a small medical helicopter clearly marked with red crosses approaching from the south. No escort, no weapons visible, just as requested. That's them, she said. Farid barked orders to his men, and they took up defensive positions. Sarah could see the tension in everyone's faces. One wrong move now, and this would all collapse. The helicopter landed about 100 meters from the village, and two figures in medical uniforms got out, carrying a stretcher and medical equipment. Sarah recognized one of them, Dr. Kim, a Navy flight surgeon she had worked with before. Two medics, no weapons, one of Farid's men reported. Good. Farid turned to Sarah. You will go out with me. We will bring them here. Sarah nodded. This was the most dangerous part, the moment when anything could go wrong. They walked out to meet the medical team. Dr. Kim's eyes widened slightly when she saw Sarah, but she maintained her professional demeanor. Dr. Martinez? Ome Dr. Kim. We're here for the medical evacuation. Thank you for coming. The patient is critical, gunshot wound to the abdomen, internal bleeding, possible organ damage. Understood. We have a full surgical team standing by at the field hospital. As they walked back toward the village, Dr. Kim spoke quietly. Sarah, are you all right? I'm fine, but there are hostages, civilians who need protection. Dr. Kim glanced at Farid, who was watching them intently despite not speaking English. Orders are to get you and the patient out. What about the others? That's complicated. They reached the building where Khalil was lying. Dr. Kim immediately went to work, assessing his condition while her partner prepared the medical equipment. This is bad, Dr. Kim said quietly. We need to move him now. Can you save him? Farid asked in English. Dr. Kim looked up. We'll do everything we can, but he needs surgery immediately. As they prepared to move Khalil, Sarah made her decision. Dr. Kim, I need to go with him. That's not necessary. We can handle it from here. It is necessary. I promised. Sarah looked at Farid. I gave my word. Dr. Kim seemed to understand the deeper implications. All right, but we need to go now. As they loaded Khalil onto the stretcher, Farid grabbed Sarah's arm. If my brother dies, he won't. I won't let him. And if you don't come back? Sarah looked around at the frightened faces of the hostages, at Ahmad clinging to his grandmother, at Rashid, who had become an unexpected ally. I'll come back. Why? Because these people need me. Because you gave me your trust, and I'm giving you mine. Farid released her arm and stepped back. As they carried Khalil toward the helicopter, Sarah heard gunfire in the distance. Not close, but close enough to make everyone nervous. What was that? Dr. Kim asked. Probably nothing, Sarah lied. She knew it was probably the sound of American forces engaging other Taliban elements in the area. The clock was ticking for everyone. They reached the helicopter and loaded Khalil inside. Sarah climbed in after him, and as the aircraft lifted off, she looked down at the village below. She could see Farid watching them go, his men still in defensive positions around the buildings where the hostages were being held. "Sarah," Dr. Kim said over the noise of the rotors, "what the hell is really going on down there? I'll brief you fully once we get Khalil stabilized. Right now, I need you to focus on saving his life." "Is that really a Taliban commander's brother we just picked up?" "Yes. And you're really planning to go back to them?" Sarah checked Khalil's pulse and adjusted his 4. "Kim, how long have we known each other?" 3 years. "Have I ever lied to you about anything important?" "No." "Then, trust me now. This is bigger than just one wounded fighter." The flight to the field hospital took 20 minutes. During that time, Sarah worked to keep Khalil stable while Dr. Kim monitored his vital signs. Twice his blood pressure dropped dangerously low, and once his breathing nearly stopped completely. "He's coding," Dr. Kim said as alarms went off. Sarah immediately began CPR while Dr. Kim prepared emergency drugs. For several terrifying minutes, Khalil's life hung by a thread. "Come on," Sarah whispered as she worked. "Don't you dare die on me now." Finally, his heart rhythm stabilized and his breathing resumed. Sarah sat back, exhausted. "That was close," Dr. Kim said. "Too close." When they reached the field hospital, a full surgical team was waiting. As they rushed Khalil into the operating room, Sarah was pulled aside by Colonel Hayes. "Petty Officer Martinez, I need a full debrief." "Now." Sarah looked back toward the operating room. "Sir, I need to know how the surgery goes." "That's not your concern anymore. You've done your job." "With respect, sir, it is my concern. I gave my word to return." Colonel Hayes stared at her. "You're not seriously planning to go back to a Taliban stronghold? There are innocent civilians being held hostage, sir, including children." "We're aware of the situation. Rescue operations are already in progress." "What kind of rescue operations?" "Colonel hesitated." "That's classified." Sarah felt her heart sink. "Sir, if you're planning a military assault on that village, innocent people will die." "Petty Officer, you are not in command of this operation." "But I'm the only person who has established trust with their commander. I can negotiate the release of the hostages." "Absolutely not. You've already taken too many risks." "Sir, please listen to me. Farid, the Taliban commander, he's not like the others. He has honor. He follows rules of war. He stopped his men from harming the villagers. If I go back as promised, I might be able to convince him to release them. And if you can't, then at least I'll be there to provide medical care when your assault happens." Colonel Hayes studied her for a long moment. "Martinez, in your assessment, what are the chances of a successful hostage rescue without casualties?" Sarah thought about the defensive position she had seen, the weapons Farid's men had prepared, the fear in the villagers' eyes. "Without negotiation? Almost zero, sir. And with negotiation? I don't know, but it's the only chance those people have." Before Colonel Hayes could respond, Dr. Kim emerged from the operating room. "How is he?" Sarah asked immediately. "He'll live. It was touch and go for a while, but we stopped the bleeding and repaired the damage. He's stable." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "Can I see him?" "He's still unconscious, but yes." Sarah followed Dr. Kim into the recovery room, where Khalil lay connected to various machines. His color was better, his breathing steady. "When will he wake up?" she asked. "A few hours, probably." "But, Sarah, even if he recovers fully, what happens then?" "He's still a Taliban fighter. That's not my decision to make." Colonel Hayes had followed them into the room. "Petty Officer Martinez, I've been in contact with command. They're willing to authorize your return to the village, but only under strict conditions." Sarah turned to face him. "What conditions?" "You'll be wearing a wire, full communication setup. You'll report everything you see and hear. And you'll have backup standing by." "How close?" "Close enough to help if things go wrong." Sarah knew that close enough could mean different things to different people. But she also knew it might be the best deal she could get. "All right, but I want guarantees that there will be no military action without my signal." "You don't get to make demands, Petty Officer." "Sir, with respect, I'm the only person who can walk back into that compound without starting a war. I think that gives me some leverage." Colonel Hayes looked like he wanted to argue, but finally, nodded. You have 24 hours to negotiate the release of the hostages. After that, we go in. Understood. As they prepared for her return to the village, Sarah sat beside Khalil's bed. She found herself thinking about what had brought her to this point. She had volunteered for the humanitarian mission because she wanted to help people. She had stayed in the village during the attack because she couldn't abandon her patients. She had treated Taliban fighters because that's what her medical training demanded. But now she was about to walk back into a hostage situation, risking her own life for people she barely knew. Was it duty? Honor? Something else? You're thinking too hard, Dr. Kim said, entering the room. Am I doing the right thing? I don't know, but I know you. You've never been able to walk away from someone who needs help, even when they're the enemy. Are they? I mean, I know Farid and his men are Taliban, but what about the villagers? What about the children? Sarah looked at Khalil's peaceful face. When he was unconscious like this, he didn't look like a dangerous terrorist. He looked like someone's brother, someone's son. Dr. Kim, if something happens to me, nothing's going to happen to you. If it does, I want you to know that Khalil saved his brother's life. Whatever else he's done, whatever cause he's fighting for, in that moment, he chose love over ideology. And you think that matters? I think it's the only thing that matters. 2 hours later, Sarah was back in the helicopter, flying toward the village. She wore civilian clothes again, but this time she was wired for communication with the command post. In her bag, she carried medical supplies and a letter from Dr. Kim confirming that Khalil was alive and recovering. As the village came into view, Sarah could see that the tactical situation had changed. American forces had established positions on the surrounding hills, and she could see movement in the tree lines. The Taliban fighters in the village were effectively surrounded. This is Overwatch, a voice said in her earpiece. Target area is secure. Hostiles are contained. Understood, Sarah replied quietly. The helicopter landed in the same spot as before, and Sarah walked alone toward the village. She could feel the weight of dozens of eyes watching her. American snipers in the hills, Taliban fighters in the buildings, and, somewhere in between, frightened villagers who had become pawns in a larger game. As she approached the village, Farid emerged from one of the buildings. He was alone, his weapon holstered, but Sarah could see the tension in his posture. You came back, he said as she drew closer. I said I would. My brother. Sarah pulled out the letter from Dr. Kim. He's alive. The surgery was successful. He'll recover fully. Farid read the letter carefully, even though Sarah suspected his English wasn't good enough to understand all of it. This is from the doctor who treated him? Yes. Dr. Kim. She said to tell you that your brother is strong, like you. For a moment, something human flickered in Farid's eyes. Then, he looked around at the hills surrounding them. Your people, they have surrounded us. Yes. You knew this would happen. I suspected it might. Yet you came back anyway. Sarah nodded. I gave you my word. Farid studied her for a long time. You are a very strange American. So I've been told. Kulme. The villagers, they have been asking for you. As they walked toward the buildings where the hostages were being held, Farid spoke quietly. You know this cannot end well for my men. It doesn't have to end badly for the villagers. That is why you are here. To save them. That's why I'm here. They reached the building where the villagers were being held. When Sarah entered, she was immediately surrounded by familiar faces. Ahmad ran to her and hugged her legs. Bibi Jan took her hands and spoke rapidly in Pashto. She says you're a miracle, Rashid translated. She says Allah sent you to protect us. Sarah knelt down to Ahmad's level. How are you feeling, little one? Much better, he said in the few English words Rashid had taught him. Sarah examined him quickly. His fever was completely gone, his breathing clear. The antibiotics had done their job. Rashid, she said quietly, I need to talk to you privately. They stepped outside, followed closely by one of Farid's guards. The American forces, they are planning to attack, she whispered. Rashid's face went pale. When? I have 24 hours to negotiate everyone's release. After that, we all die. Not if I can help it. Sarah spent the rest of the day moving between the hostages and the Taliban fighters, trying to assess the situation and find a path forward. The fighters were well armed, but outnumbered. They knew they were surrounded, knew their position was hopeless, but they also knew that surrender often meant death or worse. Farid, meanwhile, seemed to be wrestling with his own demons. Sarah caught him several times, staring off into the distance, lost in thought. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Sarah found herself sitting with Bibi Jan and Ahmad. The old woman was telling the boy a story in Pashto, her voice soft and soothing. "What is she saying?" Sarah asked Rashid. "It is old story, about brave princess who saves her people from evil king." "How does it end?" "Princess sacrifices herself, but her courage inspires others to fight for freedom." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Later that night, as most of the villagers slept, Sarah approached Farid. He was sitting alone, cleaning his rifle. "We need to talk," she said. He looked up at her. "About what?" "About tomorrow. About what happens when the sun comes up. Tomorrow we fight. Tomorrow you die. And so do innocent people." Farid set down his rifle. "You think I don't know this? Then why not surrender? Live to fight another day. You do not understand. For us, surrender is not option. Even for your brother's sake?" Farid was quiet for a long time. "My brother chose this life, as did I." "What about Ahmad? What about his grandmother? What do they choose?" "They chose to be in wrong place at wrong time." "That's not a choice at all." Sarah sat down beside him, careful to keep her hands visible. "Farid, I want to tell you something about my brother." The Taliban commander looked at her with surprise. "I had a brother, older than me, like Khalil is to you. He was a Marine deployed to Iraq. He died there, fighting people like you." Farid tensed, his hand moving toward his weapon. "But before he died, he wrote me a letter. He said that the worst part wasn't the enemy soldiers he had to fight. It was the innocent people caught in the middle. The children who had no choice about where they were born or what was happening around them. Why do you tell me this? Because I think you understand what he meant. I think you see those children in there, and you know they don't deserve to die for our war." Farid was quiet for several minutes. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "What do you want me to do?" "Let me take them away. The villagers, the children. Let me get them to safety. And my men, that's between you and them. But the villagers, they're not your enemies. If I let them go, your forces will know we are weakened. My forces already know everything they need to know." Farid looked at her sharply. "You are in communication with them?" Sarah nodded. "Yes. You have been reporting our positions, our numbers. I've been trying to prevent a massacre." Farid stood and paced away from her, his hand on his weapon. Sarah tensed, ready to dive for cover, but the commander stopped and turned back to her. "You could have called for immediate attack, guided your soldiers to our positions. Instead, you asked me to release hostages." "Yes." "Why?" "Because Ahmed's grandmother was right. Sometimes people are sent to protect others." The Taliban commander stared at her for a long time. Around them, the night was quiet except for the occasional sound of a guard shifting position or a radio crackling in the distance. "If I release the villagers, what guarantee do I have that your people will not attack immediately?" "None. But if you don't release them, I can guarantee that when the attack comes, innocent people will die." "And you? Will you leave with them?" Sarah had been dreading this question. She knew what the right answer was from a military standpoint. But as she looked toward the building where the hostages slept, she thought about Ahmed's fevered face, about Bibi Jan's grateful smile, about Rashid's willingness to help despite his own terror. "No," she said finally. "I'll stay." "Why?" "Because your wounded still need medical care. Because if fighting starts, there will be more casualties. Because someone needs to be here who cares more about saving lives than winning wars." Farid stared at her as if she were a creature from another planet. "You are either very brave or very foolish. Probably both." As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, Sarah knew that the next few hours would determine whether her faith in human nature was justified or whether she had made the last mistake of her life. Dawn broke with an eerie stillness that made Sarah's skin crawl. She had spent the night checking on the wounded and the hostages trying to stay busy while her mind raced through possible scenarios. Each one seemed to end in bloodshed. Fard had not given her an answer about releasing the villagers. He had simply walked away after their conversation, leaving Sarah to wonder whether she had reached him or merely confirmed his view that Americans were naive idealists. As the morning light grew stronger, Sarah could see movement in the hills around the village. American forces were repositioning, preparing for what everyone knew was inevitable. Through her earpiece, she heard the constant chatter of military communications. Overwatch to Phoenix. Target assessment complete. Recommend immediate action. Phoenix to Overwatch. Maintain position. Negotiator still in play. Sarah knew that negotiator meant her, and still in play meant they hadn't given up hope that she could resolve this peacefully. But she also knew that patience in military operations was measured in hours, not days. She was changing the dressing on one of the wounded Taliban fighters when Rashid approached her. "Sarah," he whispered, "Fard wants to see you." She found the commander standing at the window of the main building, looking out at the hills where American snipers were certainly watching him through their scopes. "Good morning," she said. "Is it?" Fard replied without turning around. "That depends on what you decide to do." He finally turned to face her. "I have spoken with my men. They wish to know what you offered me in exchange for the hostages." Sarah's heart rate picked up. "I didn't offer you anything." "Exactly. No prisoner exchange, no safe passage, no money. Just, what do you Americans say, goodwill? Sometimes that has to be enough. My lieutenant, Mahmoud, he thinks you're a spy sent to weaken our resolve. What do you think?" Fard studied her face carefully. "I think you are a doctor who cannot stop being doctor, even when it would save your life to do so." Before Sarah could respond, the radio in Fard's belt crackled to life. One of his lookouts was reporting movement in Sector 3. American forces were advancing closer. "Fard," Sarah said urgently, "whatever you're going to do, you need to do it now." The commander nodded and called out to his men. Sarah couldn't understand the rapid Pashto, but she could see the reactions on their faces. Some looked relieved, others angry. One young fighter argued loudly with Fard before finally walking away in disgust. "What did you tell them?" Sarah asked. "I told them we will release the villagers. Women, children, old men. They will be escorted to neutral ground." Sarah felt a wave of relief so strong it made her legs weak. "Thank you. Do not thank me yet. My men, they are not all in agreement. And your people," he gestured toward the hills. "They may see this as trick. I'll make sure they understand it's not." Fard nodded and began issuing orders. Sarah activated her radio. "This is Phoenix. Taliban commander has agreed to release civilian hostages. Request immediate ceasefire and safe passage to designated neutral zone." The response was immediate. "Phoenix, this is Control. Confirm hostage release." "Confirmed. Preparing to move approximately 15 civilians, including children, to safety." "Understood, Phoenix. All units, hold fire. Repeat, hold fire. Safe passage authorized for civilian evacuation." The next hour was organized chaos. Sarah helped the villagers gather what few possessions they had, while Taliban fighters maintained defensive positions. The wounded Taliban soldiers would stay behind. They were in no condition to be moved, and Fard wouldn't abandon them. Ahmad clung to his grandmother as they prepared to leave. The little boy was scared and confused, not understanding why they had to go without Sarah. "Why can't the doctor lady come with us?" he asked Rashid in Pashto. Rashid translated the question for Sarah. "Tell him that some of the other sick people still need my help," she said. "But I promise I'll see him again soon." She hoped it wasn't a lie. Bibi Jan approached Sarah and took her hands. She spoke rapidly in Pashto, tears streaming down her weathered face. "She says you're her daughter now," Rashid translated. "She says Allah will protect you because you protected her grandson." Sarah felt her own tears starting. "Tell her I'm honored to be her daughter." The elderly woman pulled a small pendant from around her neck and pressed it into Sarah's hand. It was a simple piece of blue stone on a leather cord. "For protection," Rashid explained. Sarah put the pendant around her neck. "Thank you." As the villagers prepared to leave, Sarah noticed that Rashid wasn't moving with them. Rashid, you need to go with the others. He shook his head. I stay with you. No, you don't understand. This is only going to get more dangerous. You stayed when you could have left. Now I stay. But you're not a combatant. You're a teacher, a civilian. Rashid looked around at the Taliban fighters, checking their weapons and preparing defensive positions. Right now, there are no civilians here. Only people who will live and people who will die. If you stay, I stay. Sarah realized there was no point in arguing. Rashid had made his choice with the same stubborn determination that had led her to make hers. The hostage evacuation took place under the watchful eyes of American snipers and Taliban fighters. Sarah walked with the group to the edge of the village, where they would be met by American medics who would escort them to safety. Ahmad broke away from his grandmother and ran back to Sarah, throwing his small arms around her waist. Don't leave us, he whispered in English. Sarah knelt down and looked into his eyes. I'm not leaving you. I'm just staying here a little longer to help some other sick people. But you'll be safe now, and that's what matters. The little boy nodded solemnly and rejoined his grandmother. Sarah watched as the group of civilians walked slowly toward the American positions, escorted by 2 Taliban fighters who would return once the handoff was complete. When the villagers were safely away, Sarah walked back into what had essentially become a fortress. The Taliban fighters had used the time during negotiations to improve their defensive positions. Windows were barricaded, walls reinforced with furniture, and sandbags improvised from grain sacks. How many men do you have? Sarah asked Farid. 12, including the wounded. Against how many Americans? Reports say 50, maybe 60. Sarah did the math. 12 Taliban fighters, 3 of them wounded, facing a full American assault force with air support, artillery, and superior equipment. The outcome was inevitable. Farid, it's not too late to surrender. For my men, surrender means Guantanamo Bay, or worse. For your men, fighting means death. Definitely. The commander was quiet for a moment. Sarah, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you become doctor? The question caught her off guard. I wanted to help people, even when those people are your enemies. I don't see enemies when I'm treating patients. I just see people who need help. That must make war very difficult for you. Yes, it does. Farid nodded, as if this confirmed something he had been thinking. There is something I must tell you. My men, they have made decision. They will not surrender, but they will not put you in danger. What does that mean? It means when fighting starts, you will be in secure location. Safe room with medical supplies. You will treat wounded as they come to you, but you will not be target. Sarah stared at him. You're protecting me. You saved my brother. You saved the villagers. It is, how do you say, debt of honor? Farid, I appreciate that, but I can't just hide while people are dying. You can and you will. This is not request. Before Sarah could argue further, the radio crackled with incoming messages. American forces were demanding surrender with a deadline of 1 hour. Attention Taliban fighters. This is Colonel Hayes, U.S. Army. You're surrounded and outgunned. Surrender immediately, and you will be treated according to the Geneva Convention. Farid picked up his radio and responded in English. Colonel Hayes, this is Commander Farid. We will not surrender, but we acknowledge presence of medical personnel. She is non-combatant and will be protected. Understood. Medical personnel will not be targeted. You have 45 minutes to reconsider surrender. Farid turned off the radio and looked at Sarah. 45 minutes. You should prepare medical station. Farid, please think about this. Your brother survived because he received proper medical care. If you die here, what happens to him when he recovers? He'll have no family left. The commander's jaw tightened. He will understand that some things are worth dying for. Like what? Like proving that we are not animals. Like showing that we have honor, even in death. Sarah realized she was fighting against something deeper than military strategy. This was about identity, about how these men saw themselves and wanted to be remembered. She spent the next 30 minutes setting up a makeshift medical station in the most secure room of the building. Rashid helped her organize supplies, and prepare for casualties. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't much to say. "Sarah," Rashid said as they worked, "I want you to know something." "What?" "Before today, I thought all Americans were the same. Soldiers who came to destroy our way of life. And now? Now I think maybe there are good people everywhere, even in wars. Rashid, when this starts, I want you to stay low and stay safe. Don't try to be a hero. Aren't we all trying to be heroes? No, we're all just trying to survive." The attack began at exactly the time promised. Sarah was checking on one of the wounded Taliban fighters when the first explosion shook the building. "Artillery," Farid said grimly as he rushed past her window. Through the window, Sarah could see American forces advancing under cover of smoke grenades. The Taliban fighters responded with disciplined fire, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. "Sarah," Farid called. "Medical station now?" She grabbed her bag and ran to the secure room, followed by Rashid. Almost immediately, wounded fighters began arriving. The first was Mahmoud, the lieutenant who had argued against releasing the hostages. He had taken shrapnel to his shoulder and was bleeding heavily. "You came back," he said in broken English as Sarah worked on his wounds. "I said I would. I was wrong about you." The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Sarah worked frantically to treat wounds as fast as casualties arrived. Gunshot wounds, shrapnel injuries, burns from explosions. Her medical supplies were running low, but she kept working. Rashid proved invaluable, helping translate for wounded fighters and assisting with medical procedures despite having no training. His gentle manner seemed to calm the injured men, even in their pain and fear. "How many more outside?" Sarah asked one fighter as she bandaged his leg wound. "3, maybe 4 still fighting. 3 or 4 out of 12. The mathematics of war were brutal and precise. Then, Farid himself was brought in, conscious but bleeding from a head wound. "How bad is it?" he asked as Sarah examined the injury. "Concussion, definitely. Possible skull fracture. You need to stay down." "I cannot stay down. Your men are dying, and there's nothing you can do about it." Farid tried to sit up, but Sarah firmly pushed him back down. "Commander, the battle is over. You know it, I know it, your men know it." Through the walls, they could hear American voices calling for surrender. The shooting had stopped. "Farid," Sarah said gently, "it's time." The Taliban commander closed his eyes. When he opened them again, Sarah saw defeat there, but also relief. "Rashid," he called weakly. The young man approached. "Tell the others to put down weapons. Tell them Commander Farid orders surrender." Rashid nodded and went to relay the message. Sarah continued working on Farid's head wound, trying to stop the bleeding. "You will tell your people that we treated you well?" Farid asked. "I'll tell them the truth. That you protected me, that you released the hostages, that you fought with honor. Will they believe you?" "Some will, and maybe that's enough." Outside, Sarah could hear American soldiers securing the area. Soon, she knew, medics would arrive to take over care of the wounded. Her part in this strange drama was almost over. "Sarah," Farid said quietly. "Yes. When they question you about this, when they want to know why you came back, what will you tell them?" Sarah thought about Ahmed's fever breaking, about Bibi Jan's grateful tears, about Khalil's life hanging in the balance during surgery, about the wounded men she had treated on both sides. "I'll tell them that sometimes the right choice isn't the smart choice. Sometimes you just have to do what your conscience tells you, even when it doesn't make tactical sense. And if they say you were foolish, then I'll say that maybe the world needs more fools who care about saving lives." The door burst open and American soldiers entered, weapons ready. Sarah raised her hands to show she was unarmed. "Medical personnel," she called out. "I have wounded here who need immediate evacuation." A familiar face appeared behind the soldiers. Colonel Hayes stepped into the room and surveyed the scene, Sarah kneeling beside the wounded Taliban commander, Rashid holding pressure bandages on other injured fighters. "Petty Officer Martinez, are you all right?" "I'm fine, sir. But these men need medical attention." Colonel Hayes looked around the improvised medical station, taking in the evidence of Sarah's work. Bandages, medical equipment, wounded fighters who had clearly received professional care. You've been treating them? Yes, sir. All of them. All the wounded, yes, sir. The colonel shook his head slowly. Martinez, do you have any idea what kind of situation you've put us in? Sir, we've got a Taliban commander who's going to survive to tell the world that an American Navy medic saved his life. We've got hostages who are going to testify that you stayed behind to protect them. We've got a humanitarian crisis that turned into a tactical victory because someone decided to practice medicine instead of warfare. Sarah wasn't sure if she was being praised or criticized. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Martinez. Your job was to provide humanitarian aid and gather intelligence. Your job was not to become a one-woman peacekeeping force. Colonel Hayes turned to the other soldiers. Get medical teams in here for all wounded, including Taliban fighters. I want everyone treated according to protocol. As American medics took over care of the wounded, Sarah finally allowed herself to feel the exhaustion that had been building for days. She sat down against the wall and closed her eyes. Sarah, Rashid sat down beside her. Yeah. Do you think Ahmad is safe now? Yes, he's safe. And his grandmother? She's safe too. Rashid was quiet for a moment. What happens to me now? Sarah opened her eyes and looked at the young man who had become her unexpected ally. She realized she didn't know what happened to civilian interpreters who had helped during combat operations. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'll make sure someone takes care of you. Will you tell them I helped? I'll tell them you helped save lives. As the last of the wounded were evacuated, Sarah found herself alone with Colonel Hayes. Walk with me, he said. They stepped outside into the bright afternoon sunlight. The village looked different now. The defensive positions were abandoned, weapons scattered where they had been dropped during surrender. American soldiers were securing the area and searching for intelligence. Martinez, I need you to understand something. What you did here, it's going to be studied, analyzed, debated. Some people are going to call you a hero. Others are going to call you reckless. And what do you call me, sir? Colonel Hayes stopped walking and looked at her. I call you a good Navy medic who forgot that sometimes being a good medic means making hard choices. With respect, sir, I think being a good medic means never forgetting that every patient deserves care, even when that patient would kill you given the chance. Especially then. Colonel Hayes was quiet for a long time. Martinez, you know this isn't over, right? There will be debriefings, investigations, reviews. A lot of people are going to want to know why you made the choices you made. I can live with that, sir. Can you? Because some of those choices put American lives at risk. Some of those choices gave aid and comfort to enemy fighters. Sarah felt anger flaring in her chest. Sir, those choices also saved innocent lives. Those choices prevented a massacre. Those choices showed that Americans can be something other than occupying forces. And you think that matters? I think it's the only thing that matters. They had reached the edge of the village, where helicopters were waiting to evacuate everyone back to base. Sarah could see Ahmad in the distance, holding his grandmother's hand as they were being processed by American medical personnel. Sir, can I ask you something? What? If it had been your child in there, your mother, would you have wanted someone to stay? Would you have wanted someone to risk their life to protect them? Colonel Hayes followed her gaze to where Ahmad was standing. That's not a fair question, Martinez. It's the only question that matters. As they walked toward the helicopters, Sarah touched the pendant that BB Jan had given her. She thought about the choice she had made to stay, the choice that had seemed so clear in the moment, but would probably be questioned for months to come. She thought about Khalil lying unconscious on the operating table, fighting for his life while his brother waited in agonizing uncertainty. She thought about Ahmed's fevered face and his grandmother's desperate prayers. She thought about Rashid's courage and Farid's unexpected honor. Most of all, she thought about the words her brother had written in his last letter home. The worst part isn't the enemy soldiers. It's the innocent people caught in the middle. Maybe she hadn't ended the war. Maybe she hadn't even changed anything significant in the larger conflict. But for a few days in a small Afghan village, she had chosen to stand with the innocent people caught in the middle. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying her away from the village and back to the larger war. Sarah realized that was enough. It had to be enough. But she also knew that the hardest part was just beginning. Now she would have to defend those choices to people who hadn't been there, who hadn't seen Ahmed's fever break or watched Farid struggle between duty and love. Now, she would have to explain why sometimes being a good soldier meant remembering how to be a good human being first. The debriefing room at Bagram Air Base was stark and windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that made everyone look pale and tired. Sarah had been sitting at the metal table for 3 hours, facing a panel of officers who seemed determined to dissect every decision she had made in the village. "Let me understand this correctly, Petty Officer Martinez," said Commander Wilson, a stern woman with steel-gray hair. "You voluntarily returned to a hostile position after successfully escaping?" "I didn't escape, ma'am. I was evacuated to provide medical care for a wounded Taliban fighter. I returned as promised." "Promised to whom?" "To the Taliban commander who had agreed to the medical evacuation." Major Stevens, the Army intelligence officer, leaned forward. "And you felt this promise was more important than your own safety and the intelligence you could have provided?" "I felt that keeping my word was important for the safety of the civilian hostages. Hostages who might have been rescued through military action. Hostages who would likely have been killed in military action." The questions continued, each one designed to probe her motives, her judgment, her loyalty. Sarah answered them all honestly, but she could see the skepticism in some of the officers' faces. Colonel Hayes, who had remained silent for most of the session, finally spoke. "Petty Officer Martinez, in your assessment, what was the likelihood of civilian casualties if we had proceeded with a standard hostage rescue operation?" Sarah thought carefully before answering. "Hi, sir. The Taliban fighters were well positioned. The civilians were being held in the same buildings as the combatants, and the fighters had made it clear they wouldn't surrender. And, in your assessment, did your actions reduce those casualties?" "Yes, sir. 15 civilians were released unharmed. At the cost of providing medical aid to enemy fighters. At the cost of practicing medicine, sir." Commander Wilson shuffled through her papers. "Martinez, I have reports here that you treated multiple Taliban wounds, provided advanced medical care that likely saved several lives. How do you justify giving aid to people who would have killed you?" Sarah felt the weight of Bibi Jan's pendant against her chest. She thought about how to explain something that felt so clear to her, but seemed incomprehensible to others. "Ma'am, when I became a Navy medic, I took an oath. Part of that oath was to preserve life and relieve suffering. It didn't specify American lives only. But surely military necessity overrides medical ethics in combat situations?" "I don't think so, ma'am. I think that's exactly when medical ethics matter most." Major Stevens leaned back in his chair. "Martinez, are you familiar with the case of Captain Lance Sigin?" "Yes, sir. Sigin had been an Air Force pilot who was captured in Vietnam and tortured for months. He had never given the enemy any information, had tried to escape multiple times, and had eventually died in captivity rather than compromise his mission or his fellow servicemen. Sigin is considered a hero because he put his duty above his own welfare. You, on the other hand, seem to have put your personal ethics above military duty." Sarah felt anger building in her chest, but she kept her voice level. "With respect, sir, I don't see those as contradictory. My duty as a Navy medic is to preserve life. That's exactly what I did." The questioning continued for another hour. They wanted to know about intelligence she might have gathered, about Taliban capabilities and weaknesses she had observed, about any information that might be useful for future operations. Sarah answered those questions too, though she found herself reluctant to provide details that might be used to target Farid or his men. They were prisoners now, she reminded herself. They were entitled to protection under the Geneva Convention. Finally, Commander Wilson closed her file. "Petty Officer Martinez, you'll be relieved to know that all civilian hostages have been processed and cleared. They're being resettled in secure areas away from Taliban influence." "What about Ahmad and his grandmother?" "The boy and his grandmother are being cared for by an international aid organization. They've specifically requested a thank you for saving the child's life. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Are they safe? As safe as anyone can be in this country. Colonel Hayes spoke up. Martinez, there's something else you should know. The Taliban commander, Farid, he's been asking to speak with you. Sarah looked up in surprise. Is he? How? Is his recovery? His injuries weren't as severe as initially thought. Concussion, some stitches, but he's stable. The question is whether we should allow this meeting. Why does he want to see me? Major Stevens answered. He claims he has information about Taliban operations that he'll only share with you. That doesn't make sense. Why would he trust me with intelligence? That's what we'd like to know. Sarah thought about her last conversation with Farid, about the strange bond that had formed between them despite being on opposite sides of a war. I'd like to speak with him, if it's permitted. Commander Wilson and Major Stevens exchanged glances. It will be highly irregular, Wilson said. But potentially valuable, Stevens added. Colonel Hayes made the decision. One meeting, fully supervised, recorded for the record. Martinez, you're to gather any intelligence he's willing to share, but you're not to make any commitments or promises. Understood, sir. An hour later, Sarah found herself in another windowless room, this one in the detention facility. Farid sat across from her, looking smaller somehow in an orange prison jumpsuit. His head was bandaged where she had stitched his wounds. A guard stood by the door, and Sarah knew the conversation was being recorded by multiple devices. Hello, Farid. Sarah, you look well. So do you. How are you feeling? Like a man who is alive when